which is more likely after 20 games, a 10-10 record or a 5-15 record? And off of that, what would be your playoff or tank plans with both of these in mind? So if I had to put money on it, and Brian and I were talking about this, like actually, if you had to put money on it, it'd probably be somewhere in between. But if
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to actually, you know, take one or the other, I think I might lean towards the 5-15 direction, mainly because of the history of previous seasons, maybe the pessimism that surrounds this team in recent history. I think if I had to choose, that's the way that I would go. And I think
Mhm.
it probably goes without saying, but the injuries are going to be the biggest thing to watch heading into the season. Now, you don't ever want to rush a guy back, but if either Mark or LaMelo is hampered and they're not 100%, and even if it's just for 5, 6 games to start the season, I think this team achieving a 500 record throughout the first 20 games is going to be hard to achieve. Now, the optimistic view, you take the health into consideration. They're playing well. Maybe Charles Lee's communication, his new culture is just wearing off on the players, and the players are buying in, and players are playing above their capabilities. You have a full off season with players like Grant Williams, Trey Mann. You've got Brandon Miller who's improving and not having to deal with the unknown, as a rookie coming into that season. So maybe 10-10 is doable. 11-9, 12-8, like that's like the optimistic view after 20 games. But Brian, my guess is still probably on the lower end, but again, like we were mentioning, it's probably somewhere in between, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, I looked this up earlier today. ESPN, their over under win totals projections for the Hornets this season had them at 29 and a half. So, it's about a quarter of that's if you're thinking, 20 games, it's about a quarter of the way, through an 82 game season. So the 7.5 number that you and I were throwing out, that's sort of like between the 5 and 15 and the 10 and 10, is sort of like, to an extent, there's like, it's plausible. There's a reason why that sort of maybe mathematically that would make some sense. If this team was fully healthy, and I'll be curious to see like what Mark Williams looks like, come preseason. I wouldn't be like shocked if they got off to like a 10-10 start, but I still think, Richie, I'm with you. I'd still think I would have them in more of the 5-15 route. It would be not a shock, but a little surprising. I think if at the quarter mark they were 10-10 in the season. But so I would say 5-15.
Yeah. What about you, Darren?
So for me, I'm kind of right with y'all as far as like there is definitely somewhere in the middle. 5-15. As much as I'm saying that that's kind of the route I see them kind of going, it still would be almost shocking to me just because 5-15 is steep, and I would expect the team to be a little better than that. But I think we have the talent to be 10-10 because it's not like 10-10. Obviously, that's 500, so it's not like it to be this, Golden State Warriors esque type team to be 10-10. But I just when you look at the individual players, the baggage, and then all the new stuff, all just everything that's coming to the team that's new, it's just really hard for me to see them go 10-10. To your sentiments, I agree. We need to see what Mark Williams looks like. We need to see LaMelo Ball looks like. I know, LaMelo's wearing the ankle brace. It seemed, I don't know if that's officially reported, but the picture looked like one. So people are saying, "Oh, LaMelo's healthy." It's like, no, it takes time. It took Steph time to learn how to play with an ankle brace, and it's just. I think I've said this before on here. I just can't. LaMelo, when he's injured and comes back, it takes him maybe 1 to 2 games. Last year was a little different, but it usually takes him about 1 to 2, maybe even 3 games, and then boom, he's putting up 30-point games, 10 straight games or something like that. I just can't rely on that happening every single time. We've been as bad as the team has been. I guess we've been quote unquote lucky enough to have that happen where LaMelo comes back from an injury and he plays very well. We just can't rely on that every time. Mark Williams with being a 7-footer with a back injury, don't know what that's going to look like. We don't have a tertiary big, so what does that look like when we see Nick Richards being forced played starter minutes? What is that like? There's so many questions. Cody Martin, I know we'll go into it later, but it's just I think that if you think of everybody at their best or above average, I think we have the talent. when you think about what we've seen, and we can only go off that, I think we're closer to the 5-15. But I will say, even though it doesn't matter, I don't think it will be a bad 5-15 where we have losses. We have 20-point losses to the Pistons, and we're losing to the Trailblazers. I don't think it's going to be like that. My hope is that if we are 5-15, there might be a couple blowouts in there, but for the most part, it's going to be we just didn't have it. We just didn't have the talent. This is where hopefully this season I hope to look at saying, okay, that's a basketball reason we lost the game. That's something we can work on, because before it's been we're missing half our team. There's nothing to take away from this game. So my hope is with the 5-15, there's a lot of basketball we can look at and say, well, if he just made that decision here or did that there, this will be a different game. That's my hope with the 5-15.
First off, it is funny that if you cover the Hornets, that like 10-10 through 20 games is like it's seen as some like pie in the sky, reality. Like maybe one day they'll get to 500 at the quarter mark of the season. But jokes aside, if they were to get to 10-10 this season, that probably means that like one of Ball or Miller is probably like they're both healthy, and one of them's probably made a jump, which is like kind of exciting to consider the the reality of a healthy LaMelo and him playing together with Miller, and one of those guys are both sort of like making a even if it's not like a big leap, like a at least like a tangible one, or something that's more than just the sort of like incremental growth. And I don't know. Like I will be curious to see this team at full strength, what the lineups look like, what the offense, like how it, assuming like it will be actually, if they were to also be 10-10, like is the offense driving it? Is it the defense? What does Mark Williams look like? Is he healthy? So I don't know. It would be curious to see like what the DNA of this team will look like once they actually get going. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, just to piggy, sort of like to bounce off what Darian was saying, is like, I hope LaMelo is healthy and plays 75 games this season and is an all-star. But I do think what we saw after the deadline last season with the addition of Seth Curry, Vasa Micic, Trey Mann, they have more like, playmaking insurance on the roster now. And I just think even heaven forbid an injury to LaMelo Ball, I think they're still going to be able to put out, like they're still going to be able to like have creativity with the ball, running pick and roll on the court. You're not going to have to go to the Ish Smith, Frank Ntilikina, like forcing Terry Rozier into being your primary ball handler. Like I think they'll have more sort of like more options to go to, which will make, even if they were 5-15, and LaMelo's hurt, it would be a more palatable watch, you know what I mean? As opposed to some of the offensive struggle fests that we've seen over the last decade with them.
Yeah, and there's a second part to this question, but I don't know if their plans would really change, like playoff or tank, depending on what their record is. I think that Charles Lee is going to coach this team to his best of his abilities. He's going to try to put out the best team possible. They're going to compete. I don't think they're necessarily going to switch or change their course of action if they are 10-10 or 5-15. I think if they are 10-10, it might be because a lot of things went their way. They were a little bit fortunate, and it probably will even out in the end. But I don't think they'll necessarily like go all in for the playoffs or tank completely if they're 5-15. I think we're just going to see this season kind of play out. So
I will say if they were 5-15, sort of, again, I think context is important, but maybe it wouldn't be a surprise. Like if they're 5-15 and Cooper Flagg is averaging, 18-9 on 50, 40, 80 shooting at Duke, like all of us at that point in time, right? Cause it's halfway through the college season or whatever. Like, I don't know. There's a certain point where I could see them like being like, all right, we got to pull the plug actually.
And you have the regime to your point, you have the regime to do it. Brand new. Yeah. They have nothing to lose. The future, I mean, as so far as we can tell, is with them, as much as we know, they're it seems as though they're all on the same page. So I don't see it being a part of a way where Charles Lee is like, oh, we're 5-15. Now I got to change all the rotations around and try to, gain his lead back. It's like, no, like to your point, if they're 5-15, I think they're going to come. They seem like a very communicative group. If they're going to come together and say, "Look, Cooper Flagg is going crazy. He probably just had by this point a 20-point game against North Carolina and a game-winning shot." As much as that would hurt, but like if that's the case, then they'll definitely. And with this class also being extremely, extremely, I wouldn't say top heavy, but the top players are just really good. I don't think that it's going to be one of those seasons where they kind of just play it out. I think if the prospects are doing what I guess they're supposed to do, I feel as though cutting the plug early will probably be the best bet. But context, to your point, Brian, is everything. It depends on injury, depends on performance, depends on a lot of stuff. I don't think straight up 5-15 warrants it, but depending on what the 5-15 looks like.
Yeah, that would still maybe be like a little early. Again, context being really like the important factor here. Health,
and then you got to think about the East as well, which we have no idea what that's going to look like.
Yeah.